Hello, everyone. Welcome. Come on in, get comfy. We will be starting shortly. Welcome, welcome. I see everyone getting in. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll start right on time. All right, I have us on time. Thank you for being here. And we welcome you to Kalogon Presents. Tonight's episode is all about falling in love with posture and positioning, something that's near and dear to my heart. And I'm glad you've joined us. My name is Wendy Underwood. I am the clinical education specialist for Kalogon, and I am very excited to be your host tonight because we have an expert panel. We have Katrina, who's in the field, working really hard with VA residents and patients with posture and positioning. We have Evan Call, who's a research scientist and adjunct professor, and really helping us with analyzing and what we need to look for when we are looking to provide that amazing posture and positioning. And Jennifer Dibble, with a vast experience with those in a skilled nursing facility working on posture and positioning. But they tell the story best, so let's let them introduce themselves. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now let's hear from our experts.
My name is Jennifer Dibble. I am a CODA by discipline. I'm currently a clinical client relations director for PN Medical. And I've been working with posture and positioning for 15, 16 years. I'm a clinical expert in positioning with one of my companies that I worked with prior. And I did a lot of content creating, webinars, education for clinicians, doing those in-services with them on how to help restraint reduction and also pressure ulcers prevention. So it's actually a huge passion of mine, and I'm excited to be here today to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. When you're not focused on all of that, what do you do for fun?
I'm a mom of 3 boys, and it's always something outside. So I live in Florida. I love being outside in the water. We're a baseball family, so we're always out on the field, always having a good time. It's a lot of play for me. So that's all I do. I do a lot of playing.
Great.
Hi, I'm Evan Call. I am a researcher and test lab operator and adjunct faculty at Weber State University. I've been working on wheelchair cushioning, hospital bed cushioning, and pressure injury prevention kinds of research for approximately 27, 28 years. We do a lot of human subject research, a lot to do with positioning and stability and how do people function in their wheelchair or their accommodation. I have 6 children. I have 24 grandchildren, with 1 on the way. And my hobby and interest is I enjoy building furniture. I've made cribs and hope chests for each of my children and grandchildren, and building gift boxes and things is just one of those fun things I like to do.
Hi, my name is Katrina. I am an occupational therapist, and I work for Therapy Management Corporation as a rehab director in New Jersey. I am a clinical leader for postural positioning within our company's clinical excellence team. And I've had a more recent experience with wheelchair positioning. I've been diving into it for the last 3.5 years, but I absolutely love it. It really does fascinate me. And I work at a veterans facility where we are able to work very closely with ATPs on those custom positionings for just wheelchairs and power chairs. So I find it very fascinating. And in my free time, I just got a puppy. So I spend all my time training my puppy, and I love to do community service too when I have the time.
Wonderful. Katrina, you missed one little part. Share about what's happening May of 2023. I'm very excited for you.
What is happening in 2023?
I thought it was you're getting your degree, your next degree.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Yes, I am
I'm proud of you.
I am getting my clinical science doctorate through University of Pittsburgh in occupational therapy. So it's focused on implementation science and applying research into clinical practice.
I love it. Thank you all so much. And we wanted you all here because you are experts in the field. And I think it's really neat to have clinicians that are on the ground running, and then to have the research and the lab-based person. Like, we're very honored to have that as well. So thank you for being here. So we are here today to talk about posture and positioning, and really help give some pointers and some information for those living an active seated life. So let's start with you, Evan. Are there any risks associated with improper positioning or posture?
Oh, absolutely. First off would be a pressure injury risk. If you're not seated properly, you end up loading the bony prominences inappropriately, and you end up with significant risk for tissue breakdown. And with the high number of seated individuals who experience pressure injury, it's got to be something that we focus on. We really have to be looking at where those risks are and mitigating them.
Excellent. And anything else to add on that, Jennifer or Katrina?
So one of the things too, when one of the biggest risks, of course, are pressure ulcers, but also contractures. Because if you end up in a seated position in a certain way for a long period of time, it just starts getting tight. And it might not be a contracture right away. It might just be tightness, and you'll have to do a lot of stretching and strength training to help with that. But if we can avoid that altogether, that'd be super great.
Exactly. I think we can easily think of comfort would be a great reason to work on it and to look for it and to look for those risk factors. But sometimes we don't think of the other, the skin integrity, like Evan said, and then the contracture. Anything you would add, Katrina?
I've seen a lot that people assume fixed positions, and if they are not in the right seating or in the right wheelchair, they assume those fixed positions, and then it's hard to change their chair into a different chair because they've already assumed that fixed posture.
Good point.
So that can happen as well.
Very good.
So Wendy, could I add something to that?
Sure.
One of the things that we don't think of often as a risk for posture and positioning is the risks associated with not being able to function properly in your daily activities.
Yes.
You reach for something, if your posture's not right or your position's not right, you don't have a stable base, and so you can tip or you fall, or you're unable to, say, reach and pick up a gallon of milk off the shelf at the store, or the things that the last thing you want to do is to have to try to get back in your chair in the grocery store after you've spilled a gallon of milk, right? So the risks associated, both social, safety, and function with posture and positioning, are something we really have to keep in mind as well.
So if we're looking at someone for proper posture, proper positioning, let's start with posture. Are there certain assessments? Anybody can answer. Certain assessments that you look for? I get that question a lot.
Personally, for me, the biggest thing I used to always do is get them lying down, seeing where their range of motion is or the lack thereof, trying to get a good measurement of that.
So seeing them out of the chair.
Seeing them out of the chair, right? As a therapist, we're always thinking about strengthening, then adapting, and then compensating what we couldn't strengthen or adapt. And when it comes to positioning and posture, I did the opposite. So I used to compensate first, get them as proper position as possible, 90, 90, 90, right? You want the hips, the knees, the ankles at 90, 90, 90. The closest
possible, right?
Closest you can get to that. If I can get a patient to that area close as possible, then I work on strength training to stay there, and then I start removing stuff off the chair. Mm-hmm. So my assessment usually starts with getting them out of the chair and then looking to where I can strengthen after I've compensated them for proper positioning.
That way, throughout the day and throughout their activities of daily living, like Evan brought up, they are comfortable, they're able to have their meal, do their participate in their daily life. But in the time they're with you for their therapy time, they're working on that restoration. So yeah, good point.
I also think, to Evan's point, looking at the person in their realistic environment during their actual preferred activities is most important. For example, if someone is sitting in a wheelchair that may not be appropriate, but they really like to go to the dining room to eat, you need to see what's the height of that table.
Yeah.
And if you're putting them in a chair, you want to make sure that they'll still be able to access that table appropriately. So getting someone on the mat is very important, but also seeing them in their realistic environment is very important. I've tried to search the literature to see if there is a standardized assessment for postural positioning. I haven't really found one. There are generics that you can use in relation to balance, mini best, things like that, but that doesn't always accommodate someone who's low level functioning.
Katrina, the coolest document that I've found that kind of functions as a guide is the old Autobach manual. Have you ever seen the Autobach seating manual? So the mat analysis is essential, and the home analysis is essential. And then putting the person in their chair and measuring their function in those areas is also difficult, but essential. When we do fit a person in a chair for a study, we focus on that 90-90-90 start, then we add the seat dump, but then we go to spinal alignment. Is the spine where it needs to be? Is the head over the pelvis? Is the person sitting windswept? Is there a pelvic obliquity? And if we identify those, we have to decide if it's really better to accommodate or correct, right? And that's something that's a little bit beyond where we work in our research. We typically get people in, understand where they're at, and then do the measurements. But the critical piece of that is, you know, if they're not stabilized in their windswept position or their pelvic obliquity, then any daily activity increases the risk to the tissue. So there are significant concerns. One of the tricks that when we work with these patients, we're interested in what is the load on the tissues? What are we doing to protect the critical points? And so, of course, the pressure map becomes a critical element. And pressure maps aren't perfect, but when we're talking about seeing what the patient is experiencing, they're a very good tool. And in that case, we learned some very interesting things. First off, there are actually 26 degrees of freedom in a pressure map. And that's why it's so hard to use them, because the person sitting, how their arms are resting, how their calves are hanging, whether or not they're windswept, did they land the same when they transferred as last time? There's 26 of these elements that can impact the measurements in a pressure map. And so when you think about those, you have to kind of prioritize and identify, you know, what is going to help this patient the most and how do we measure it? So is there seat dump? Do we have the center of gravity as low as possible? Have we got the calves so that they're helping offload the pelvis? Have we taken as much load off the pelvis as we can, right? The immersion and the envelopment that's necessary to distribute the force. And of course, the pressure map in that case becomes a great tool for being able to see, visualize, and then measure the effectiveness of your correction. If you've made a change, did the pressure map show an improvement?
A lot of times we don't, as clinicians, have access to that. So if we find a company that offers pressure mapping, we want to partner with them because it does give us that before and after we've done some things. And there are many variables with that, but we don't always have that. So utilizing anything and learning from each other like we are today really does help us and keeps us from being all subjective. You know, we can have some really good data and some measurements to put in our documentation that we always want to beef up, of course. But if you find a company or you're reaching out to different companies that offer seating and posture analysis and they have the pressure mapping, please partner with them because that's just another tool for your toolbox as clinicians. So I want to switch gears a little bit and go to posture. So, you know, we can tell when someone has bad posture. We all know we're supposed to have good posture. A lot of times we're working with diagnoses that we're not going to totally correct the posture, but what are some tricks or tips that we can offer people viewing this to help with posture? I mean, maybe somebody's viewing this that is living an active seated life, and they want to make sure they're doing all that they can to keep whatever posture they have.
Evan hit the nail on the head with one of the things he was saying earlier for this, gravity, the use of gravity. If you can get a tilted chair and tilt them in space, it's super helpful. You still get them in a good position. You sort of are still being able to offload them on all these different pressures, and still get them a good posture just by tilting their chair in space. And not all of us get these amazing chairs that are electric that we can tilt and they automatically do it. We got to get our hands dirty and bloody knuckles, taking wheelchair wheels off and putting it to the back, and finding wheelchairs that do that kind of thing, or dropping it with a bucket seat or a drop seat. Things like that is super helpful. But gravity is your friend. Even if you can't fix the posture, but you're trying to relax all those muscles that are super tight. But again, just getting them out of the chair, laying them down to where it's comfortable enough to feel that stretch, super helpful.
I agree. We learned a lot when Jennifer and I went to a course of the Meeks method, sarahmeekspt.com. And we learned a lot about using gravity. We realized we were doing some of it with our patients, and we were putting them and we were grading, like, let's say they were on a big wedge, and then we would go down and let gravity kind of take over. But we learned so much at the course, so much more we could do. We also had to take some of that and adapt it to our frail, geriatric population that we were treating too. So I think going to courses and finding different ways, but we did learn a lot about how to utilize gravity and spinal decompression and keep it safe for osteoporosis. Sarah Meeks is very good about that. So that's one method. If you haven't looked that up, just so many ways to adapt that and fit into different diagnoses.
Again, another thing that is a big deal with posture is also your ability to take your breath and be able to use that pressure to hold yourself up, or put yourself in different positions, or moving in general while you're seated. So sometimes maybe they may be fixed in that posture, but getting them good breath support and strength in that area could be super helpful for the pressures they need to be able to be more stable in movement or just sitting for a long period of time.
Excellent. Anything else to share on posture before we move on?
I also think it's important just to keep in mind, especially for our folks who deal with the geriatric population and those with cognitive comorbidities, it is very important to think about how the posture progresses throughout the day. For example, our folks with dementia, they're very up and alert in the morning time. As soon as it hits 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, they start to slouch. We need to keep in mind that we need to put those supports in their wheelchair and their seating system that will support them throughout the day.
That postural fatigue, it can happen, during the meal, and we think, oh, they just don't want to eat, but really they just can't. The postural fatigue is a real thing. So thank you for pointing that out. Now back to positioning. Let's talk about the pelvis, because we all know that's where it starts.
The pelvis truly is the foundation for a person's posture as well as position. And we have to understand that the pelvis, it's naturally a 3-point load. You have the bony structure that's going to contact those 3 points. And if we can utilize that in a productive fashion, we can maintain the posture and the position so that the person is more functional through the day. There's always that tendency to rotate the pelvis and slide into sacral sitting. And that happens going down the sidewalk in your chair, and the vibration causes your weight to shift. But if your foundation is located properly and your center of gravity is low and properly positioned, then that vibration doesn't actually walk you out of the chair. So that proper setup that puts the position of the pelvis where it belongs and in a position that protects the bony prominences, then the rest of the seating, the positioning, and the posture, as well as daily function, all have a great place to start.
If we're talking about someone seated, and what are some things that we can do to make sure we get the pelvis as close to 90 as we can for that person? How do you work your magic, ladies?
So we were talking about Sarah Meeks a little bit, and I actually learned this from her. Of course, pelvis is the first thing you want to try and get coordinated. People don't know how to use their pelvis. They're really, really stiff with it. I mean, you can ask somebody, one of your family members, and ask them to tilt it back or tilt it forward, and they're not exactly sure what you're talking about. And you'll say, gyrate like Elvis or something like that. You know, so we would have them sit on the edge of the mat, like the corner of a mat. And we would say like a bucket of water. So spill the bucket of water out this way. Oh, don't spill the bucket. Spill it out towards the back. Bring it so you don't spill it at all. Spill it out back towards the front. So that's how we would get them to get used to moving their pelvis around. It's just harder to understand those muscles and how they work because we don't see them and use them constantly, like our arms and our legs and our fingers. That was usually the trick I always used and where I started when we were working with a pelvis.
And then sometimes, like Katrina brought up earlier, they have a cognitive deficit. And so we have to be creative with how we get that across. Any pointers on that?
I really like the idea of those cushions that have those wells that you can adapt. For those who do have options for customizable cushions, you can actually adapt the size of the well based off of where the bony prominences are hitting. So even if someone has a smaller buttocks, but they tend to slide forward a bit, you might want to make that well a little bit bigger at times. It really depends on how the person's sitting and how they go throughout their day, but that's definitely a factor that you can use when you're looking at someone's custom positioning.
And it is individual to them. So that can take us over to offloading. How do we promote offloading? Because we know it's so important. We've talked about the risks today with skin integrity. So how do we promote really good offloading?
For offloading, working in a skilled nursing facility, there wasn't a lot of movement in general. So when you're in that type of setting, you're always trying to encourage them to go to an activity or go to an exercise group. We're constantly asking them to reach forward, reach to the side, reach above their head, so they can continually get offloading. That doesn't get to happen all the time. And it's hard to sit in a chair for 8+ hours a day, right? That is not what we do. We don't sit down for that long. Heck, I start moving around after 5 minutes, offloading myself from side to side. So encouraging the staff also to lay them down and put them on a schedule of either getting up and walking them or having them lie down were some of the ways that in the skilled nursing facility that we were able to offload somebody that didn't have the cognition to do it or didn't understand the importance of moving themselves around.
To Jennifer's point, those turning and repositioning programs are so important just to train the caregivers on how to offload someone when they are in one of those bulky chairs that maybe they are not sure how to offload the person, using those tilt and recline features, maybe showing them how to cue the person to offload from left to right. All those points are very important.
I love how the orbiter cushion, and I'm new at learning about it too, but I love how it has those air cells so that it's offloading, and then we promote the person to continue with all of the things that you are telling them and the different ways. And I also like how you brought up maybe they can't do it on their own, so implementing somebody to do some sit to stand with them, making sure that there's a scheduled time to offload really helps when they can't always remember or do it themselves, or even like you said, maybe they don't see the importance, but we do. We want their skin to be at its best. So having a cushion that can do that for them and with them with an app, and then being able to do it all these other ways, I think is very important.
So Wendy, could I just interject here?
Of course.
The comments that Katrina just made are very important to explore just a little bit further. If we think about trying to offload, the shape of the pelvic bucket and what it's doing becomes critical. And using that, especially for people who don't have the ability to do a pressure relief lift or a good forward lean, to do the offloading, we have to start the process with a highly immersing and highly enveloping cushion. Now, you mentioned the orbiter. The orbiter is excellent at that because it takes those loads that the cushion is seeing and adjusts them to be able to put that person in the proper position. Now, the value of that is that it creates a trochanteric shelf as well as a support and basket to hold the pelvis in that location. And if you can tie a trochanteric shelf to hold those trochanters and stabilize them, then that takes away the potential for the pelvis to rock one direction or the other, to bottom out on one of the ischial tuberosities. It also reduces the tendency for sacral sitting, and being able to create that proper bucket kind of shape allows us to offload even better. So along with immersion, creating the ability to sink down into this cushion and have enough cushion to do those things, we have to think about envelopment. Now, Katrina mentioned the ability to change the shape of the cushion, to change the shape of the well, which is a beautiful, very important process. But on top of that, we have to have something that provides envelopment. Otherwise, we get point loads that are too high. So even the cushions that do this well shaping will have a very high-end product to envelop, meaning almost like wet it out. Wherever the cushion can, it touches the body and supports the skin, distributes the load further, and makes it so that that tissue has as low as possible forces applied to that tissue. And this is kind of evidenced, this mobility thing that Jennifer was mentioning. Think about, we have one volunteer that we've used in a number of research studies, incredibly high risk, many years post-injury, lots of atrophy, but he's a former member of the U.S. Wheelchair biathlon team. And boy, what a mobile individual. And he has never suffered breakdown because of his level of activity, because of the fact that he's so mobile, so moving, and so able to keep himself involved and engaged. So even though he's highly involved, he is able to protect his tissue. That's probably one of the toughest things to do, is to encourage someone to remain active. You've got someone who, former policeman that we've worked with, very active, hunting, fishing, etc., but suffers injury, spinal cord injury. He loses that motivation. So we've got to be able to keep them doing that, because just the action of swinging a fishing rod changes those 26 degrees of freedom, redistributes the force, and enriches their life and protects their tissue. So those become kind of essential elements to incorporate here.
And as occupational therapy professionals, we love to hear that. We love that, engaging in what they used to do, but then also it's helping with their positioning, with their posture, and with their life. So we just incorporated the mind, body, and spirit. Good job, Evan. We love to hear that. So what about out of the chair? Any tricks or pointers or any information we want to share about in-bed positioning?
When a person transfers to bed, we have to pay attention to a number of significant issues. First is the head of the bed. We have to manage the head of the bed just like we manage the posture and the position in a wheelchair. When the head of the bed is all the way up, you're in the exact same load condition you're at when you're in a chair. That doesn't help us. We're trying to use bed as an opportunity to offload the tissue, get the pressures way down, and let the blood flow return and restore the tissue. So keeping the head of the bed as low as possible, gatching the knees. If you raise the knees a little bit, you get that gravity effect back helping you. That becomes essential in protecting these people. The other thing that we really do have to promote, and there's some interesting recent studies about this, and that's turning, periodic turning and repositioning. And if the person's not able to do it, we've got to get them a caregiver that can, to help them to be able to rotate left, right, even if it's those micro turns that just offloads a little bit. Now, we've always said the 2-hour thing, and some people claim that comes from Florence Nightingale because it took her that long to go through the ward and turn everybody. I'm not sure where it started, but new research is saying it's actually just a little bit longer than that. 2.5 to 3 hours. If you can rotate, reposition, you protect the tissue. So those become really important active functions that you have to keep in mind and do in the bed, when oftentimes we think of bed as, oh, we're just there, right? We're done for the day.
And if I'm the person living that active seated life, I can take that away from me, from this, and realize, hey, maybe I shouldn't just stay in the same spot. And if you're a caregiver or a care partner, this is very important. So implement this in the person you're helping. And then we, as clinicians, get to educate, and then educate again. And then when we just think we're done, we educate again, because it takes that many times to make sure that everybody's on the same page with a turning program, because it is so important.
To add to what Evan was saying as well is, yes, a turning schedule is very important. A lot of people that are wheelchair bound are very weak or unable to keep their position for a long period of time. So even in bed, if you're turned to one side, you start following that towards your back again. So using wedges and rolls to help keep a person in that position that you're looking for is super helpful. I know pillows are usually used, they slide right back out, or they flatten right back out and they just lay right on top of them. So just keeping that in mind, having good wedges or good rolls are super helpful.
Along with that, I think it's super important to use those pillows to protect the bony prominences in bed. Oftentimes we see patients crossing their legs, keeping their legs close together, especially if they do have contractures. So making sure you are utilizing pillows to protect the knees, to protect the shoulders, the elbow from those bony prominences, and the risk of having wounds. Definitely important to use pillows.
And we need to be realistic to the person. If I go in and I've got this beautiful positioning, I've got them on their side, and I come back in 15 minutes later and they had somebody fix it, well, maybe it's because that's when they watch their favorite program and they couldn't see the TV. What was I thinking? I have this great plan. So make it realistic to them. Maybe that's not the time. Maybe after that favorite program, then we can do the side while they rest. But they're trying to watch the TV, of course, they're going to bring somebody in to fix them back. So we need to be very conscious of the person and their interest and their life. It's their life. So what's going to be realistic to them too? What are some yes.
Sorry.
No.
In support of what Jennifer was just saying, well, and Katrina, there is a nifty product called the Z-Flow Positioner. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but the Z-Flow Positioner is almost like a zero memory fluid, but yet it acts like foam as well. So when you shape it and put someone who's laying on their side and they've got their knees and their ankles rubbing on each other, you shape it and put this between their legs. It is a wonderful way to offload and protect those tissues, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't squish out. It's even better than the wedges, because the wedges are tapered and they want to slide out. So I have found these positioners to be absolutely fabulous for being able to put in those strange positions, prop them in say a 30-degree turn or less than 45, or wherever you need to be to protect the tissue, and they still work.
So we've talked about some really great things, some really great strategies, and a lot of things to think about. But what are some barriers? What what might someone living in active seated life, if they're trying to make sure they're as comfortable as possible and looking for all these risks, what are some barriers they might run into?
Funding is a big one.
Yes.
A lot of times, if you don't write what you want and you're submitting it to your insurance company, if you don't write it in the correct way that your medical status or your medical conditions requires you to have the specific cushion or the specific support, and then they won't cover it. So really making sure that you are very vocal about what you need, either as the patient or as the therapist who's advocating for the patient, is so important.
Great tip.
Just to add on to what Katrina was saying as well, not only that, but the reimbursement for getting a new cushion or maintaining the one you have. It does take some work to maintain a cushion. You're using it all the time, every day. So making sure it's clean and dry, and making sure if there is a breakdown somewhere in that cushion that you are going to get a new one. Once there's a breakdown in a cushion, it's going to affect the entire thing in your whole seating system. So just being careful to make sure that it's well maintained.
I would add to that kind of the OT stuff, and Katrina, forgive me if I'm stepping on your toes here. I recently tore my tibialis anterior tendon in my left foot, and I'm on a trike, you know, the knee riding thing. And I am amazed at the barriers that I run across, the difficulty in getting around, trying to go to the grocery store, or getting into a friend of mine's house who has no accessible entry. So the important difficult thing that we face is some sort of understanding, both in us and in society, about how do we deal with these barriers. And you know what? I'm a little bit big, but if 3 of my buddies can get me over that threshold, yeah, we can have a normal evening like we used to do, right? So one of the barriers is just that plain old access.
Yes, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And we take it for granted if we're not living an active seated life, or if you're, you know, you have to use that scooter and you haven't before. We take it for granted. So great points. And I think a lot of times having access to creative clinicians too, because sometimes you have to use what you have. So if you are a person needing this, or you're a care partner looking out for someone else, make sure you contact us. So maybe we can hook you up with the right people for some great ideas. We want to help, and we love to give our little 3 or 4 ideas. And then if none of those work, we love to give you 3 or 4 more. So you're never a bother. But yes, and access for sure, a big barrier. So we're going to close up soon. I want to give you each a chance to give some final words of wisdom, and I appreciate each of your time tonight.
What I would like to leave everybody with is, if there's something that you're enduring with your posture or your positioning and you have a seated lifestyle, reach out, do your research. There's a lot of great therapists out there. There's a lot of great companies that are doing amazing things with technology. It's just outstanding stuff that it's been going on, especially the last 5 years, I want to say. Some really cool stuff out there. So do some research. It's there. There's a lot of stuff for you, available for you. So go out there, go get it.
Katrina, what words would you leave everyone with?
I would say definitely get to know who that patient is, what they want to do in their life, and how they are going to achieve that using the wheelchair, because that will provide you with answers on how you need to direct what supports you need to provide, what seating system you need to provide, and also just understanding that you need to anticipate the future too. I know sometimes things happen spontaneously, but if someone has a chronic condition, we need to anticipate a decline in that and figure out how we will be able to incorporate that into the seating system.
Perfect. Evan, take it away.
My thoughts, what you should go away with is we really do have opportunities to improve life, and the application of the new technologies that Jennifer mentioned is excellent. Utilize them. The devices that warn you for bottoming out, or the devices that measure how far you are from bottoming out, apply them. Don't be afraid to expect to be able to have a normal life experience. Expect that the world will accommodate you, and don't be afraid to ask for that. I think we're all entitled to a rich and full life. And if it doesn't include swinging a fishing pole once in a while, or building something in the shop, or playing with your grandkids, then, you know, we gotta get that fixed.
Agreed. Thank you all so much. And we really enjoyed getting to know each of you. And we're excited that you were able to share your expertise today. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks.